At this stage in our project, we've interviewed around 17 different individuals, and we've started to come up with the common language that people are using to describe the job that they had to get done. But I thought it'd be worth doing one whole video that really answers the question, how do the jobs in Jobs to be Done form? And there are two different ways of doing it. The first way is the one pioneered by Bob. Now, Bob is a hugely empathetic individual, and he came up with this idea, and he was able to interview people and to see the common patterns between different interviewees, where you could say that these people over here have similar motivations and those ones over there have very separate motivations. So what I'll do is I'll show you how that works on a Miro board first, and you can see in the prior videos, I'll link below, we go through this process, myself and Yanis, on Miro. However, there is I think an easier way of doing this, and that second way is something that was pioneered by Ryan Singer. So Ryan built something for Bob, or on his own behalf, I'm not quite sure which, but I had a chat with Ryan, and he's explained that this uses something called wards clustering. And again, what we're going to do there is to try and separate out people. So I want to separate groups of people who have similar intent and keep them together. And I want to separate those that have different intents, different reasons why they bought, into different buckets. So let's have a walkthrough, and I'll show you how both of these work right now. Right, so here we are in the Miro board, and what you can start to see in this view here, and let me see if I can zoom in, which I can. So we've got a Keel here, a DT, Jackie, and what I did when I first looked at this is, and this was back on October the 1st, is I went back to each of the stories and I thought to myself, what is the core essence of this story? If I boiled it down and made it about one simple idea, what might that be? Like, what was it that's caused a kill to buy? And so in this case, I've picked that he's triggered by seeing the impact of visual ideas on others, especially in this social media context. It's not something he's immediately doing. So he's not built. There are some people who are driven to learn the skills because they must use them in work. But in his case, he wanted to do something in the future. And there's an element of wanting to do something that's fun, doing some enjoyable art and things like that. So I've gone and done that, and I've done this with Aditi as well, and Jackie, and so on and so forth. So each of them, I've come up with something, and in the box below you can see these are the push and pull statements that each of them made. So it just gives you an opportunity to think through the story again and say, okay, what motivated them? What caused them to say, today's the day I spend my money and join Yanis's course, or one of these others? And so what you can see is Yanis and I then started to drag these around the place. So, card sorting exercises, you're pulling concepts that are similar together, close together, and those that are dissimilar, far apart. And so in this case, we picked Akil, Aditi, Jackie. We felt that Tammy and Anne were somewhat similar. Down here, I think we had Kiran, Mittal, Wes, and then Wes 2. We were still looking at that. Because they were doing this for a work context. It was work that had triggered them in. Nikki and Knife were definitely doing this as a healthy hobby. And then we had Kathy and Frederick. We weren't too sure. And then some people up here, so Alex, Frederick, Eduardo and Francesca were up here as separate groups. Now, and by the way, over here we had Ben and Khalid. Now, I recruited those via user interviews, and I interviewed them, and they were sketchnoters. And when we looked at their story, in spite of the fact that Khalid's a student and Ben is a 30-odd-year-old film director, we felt that this was purely about getting their own notes and ideas organised and displayed in a visual format to help them learn better. And because it was so dissimilar to the other stories over here, and because actually Yanis didn't want to touch these, we excluded Ben and Khalid from the research at this point, because there wasn't much point in having a separate group if he's not got any interest whatsoever in teaching sketchnoting. So this is the first way. We could have spent longer on this. We could have sat down and just built up the jobs in this way here by saying, is Kieran really similar to Mittal? Is he more similar to Wes or Kieran? Like, who is the most important one here, and how do we go about this? But we stopped at this point. However, if you have nothing else but your stories, you can sit and you can sort people into buckets where you've got people here doing it largely for a hobby, people here doing it largely for work, people here doing it largely for social media, and people here doing it largely because they like learning and they're communicators and they wanted the skill to do this themselves. From that, you can then look at what are the common motivations within them, and you can start to form up a job to be done. But I'll show you. So this is Bob's way of doing. This is how he did it first, how his brain works. When I first started learning this, I struggled. I really did. Now I'm able to see it a lot more, but it's still, this requires a deep intuition and empathy about what it is that drives people. So I think it's slightly harder. The second way that we do this, and this was Ryan Singer's innovation, where he uses a mathematical model called ward clustering, and now I'll walk you through how that works. Okay, so here we are now, we're back in, let me just get that sidebar out of the way, they're back in this application that we've built here. And so the way it works here, we've got the stories for every single individual that we've got here, we've got the setup, and we've got some notes here. And in this case, we've captured all of the individual forces of progress. So all the pushes and all the pulls for each and every interviewee, plus some observations. What we do next is we bring this across into a board. So this is much the same as a Miro board. And if you watch the last video, you'll see how this works. But basically, we drag, much the same way you do it with the whole interview, so groups of interviewees. Now we're doing it at the individual push and the individual pull statement level. So we've pulled together here, this example, Kieran, I cannot rely on a graphic designer to help me design my graphics in a timely manner. So that was a push that made him want to learn this himself. He couldn't rely on somebody else to do it for him. Nikki used to have a team of support through her work, but then she left that organisation, no longer had the access to somebody who was going to help her. And Wes used to have support when he was in a big consultancy, but he also had a graphic designer who was an ex-colleague who he used to kick this work across to, but realised actually if he could do all of this work himself, he would make more money. And so we've grouped those up at this higher level statement, and we've labelled it. So when I used to have someone else to do this, but now need to learn how to do it myself. Now, what you can see here is we've done this for a range of different statements, and we've tried to drag them all together as best we possibly can. So I see visuals from a creator that resonate, see an idea expressed visually and realise it could be a good way to communicate meaningful. So all of these push statements here, from all of these different interviewees, were all driven by an overarching objective, which was a visual idea causes me to stop and think. And I want the ability to trigger that experience in others. So I'm going to zoom out of here because there is quite a lot of it. But what you do is you pull these into piles. Again, it's card sorting. I go and drag cards together that are statements that are more similar, and I drag them apart when they're less similar. And I try and give them an overarching label. And you can see here there's about 16 different ones for the pushes. And similarly over here on the pulls, if I zoom in here on one, I don't know what this one up the top is. Let's go on the side. So I can fit this around my work or home schedule. So each person in here had a need to do it. They would only join a course if it was something that was that they could fit around their time. Others wanted to do something that was at a time and pace that suited them. It was slightly different. So some were I have to fit this around my work schedule. Some were drawn to, I don't know when I'm going to do it, but I'll put it in a time that fits me. And then others over here, I think there was another one. Personal help, feedback, structure and support. So, some people wanted that engagement with a real tutor in a live setting. And that was very different to wanting to join a DIY course. So we have all of these statements. We have everybody loaded in here. And so then what we can do, and this is coming from Ryan. So Ryan then taught me the way that he thinks about this. I get all of my interviewees down the side here, and I get all of these force statements along the top, so I can see I can see the pushes here, or I can filter out the pulls here, or I can see all of it. And I can step through it and say, was this true or false for somebody in in each of these statements? And it was true for the three that happened to be in that group and not true for others. When you're coming up with the statements, if the statement's a little ambiguous, you end up marking everybody as a yes, and that doesn't help you filter. So it's good practice to get to a statement that is written tightly enough that you can only say yes to a certain group of people. And if you go back and you think, well, actually, was this true for somebody else? Then maybe go back to the recording and make sure you capture a push or a pull in their own words. So go back to your interviews. It's kind of a cyclical process that you're going through here until you can code up this whole matrix. And in this case, I think we've got 32 different statements across 17 or 15 interviewees, because we weeded out the individuals who had second stories, because we didn't feel those second stories were different enough. They were continuations on the same journey. Now this is where clustering comes in. So this uses something called ward clustering. Now ward clustering, you can go and look it up on ChatGPT or Google or whatever it is. But effectively what we've got here is, and don't get hung up on the language, but what we're trying to do is minimize the difference between the people who are in each cluster. So to begin with, how many did we have in the end? I think 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 15. So in our case, initially there would have been 15 different clusters, because every person is as identical to themselves as they possibly could be. So 15 individuals. At the next layer down, it would start to create 2 groups from these, or however many people fit in there, and you might find that you have 10 people who are more similar and 5 that are dissimilar. And what it's doing is it's looking at these labels here. So in this case here, Kieran and Wes both agreed with this statement and they both disagreed with this statement. And so based upon what they agree and disagree with, they are more similar to one another than they are to any of the others in these other groups here. And so you just drive this out. The standard library, I'm using Python on Railway to drive this out. You can have a look here, and what you can create here, so the application automatically says, if we're interviewing, let's say 12 to 20 different people, we're probably not going to get a massive number of groups. We don't want too many groups. We want a tight number, so that we can see the big picture pieces, and we're not looking for the atomic detail, so I could do it on Tuesday at 3 p.m. when my kids are at school or something like that. Like that's too detailed. We want it at a level where you're going to end up with 3, 4 or 5 groups, because that's good enough for the communication and design purposes. What the application allows you to do when you see this is you can see here 2, and then we had 7, and then we had 6. But if I move it to 4 groups, 2 and 7, these stay the same. So that Wes and Kieran are too similar to one another, as are all of the people here in cluster 2, whereas Frederick and Francesca Julia are seen as different enough to Nikki, Knife, Kathy and Eduardo. And so now I'm able to ask myself, if I go all the way back to what Bob does and pulling these into 3, 4 or 5 groups, rather than having to think through that, I'm able to go in at the atomic push-pull level, and I can say, does that make sense? Can I see how their stories were similar and different? And what is it about these similarities and differences that we see in these yes and no statements that tell us why these people bought what they bought, and why did they make the critical choices that they made? So this is how this process works. First, you have to kind of drag every card together and give it a group statement. Then you have to say, is it true or false for each individual? And then you just push it through. Ward's clustering method. Don't do anything too fancy. Ask it to create 3, 4 or 5 groups, and ask yourself, in this case here, cluster 2 splits out open. So the cluster 4 and 5, they remain the same, that team there. Jackie, Aditi and Alex are different from Akil and Mittal and Tammy. Did that make sense? In our case, I think there's probably a case for being 5 groups here, but because of the way Yanis wanted to run this and to focus in, these were similar enough that we can run some analysis, we can target this group, and we can start to map out what are their jobs to be done. So we pick that, and then we come over here and we populate the jobs themselves. So here we have those 4 different clusters, but rather than being labelled based on the simplistic pieces, just a simple title of cluster 1, 2, 3, 4, we're coming in here, and if you have a look at these, when I can, so I can, or when I am, so I can, come down to, sorry, let me skip past this. In this case, we see just the coding matrix for the 2 interviewees who agreed for this, and they both agreed with this. So therefore, that is a statement that matches this job to be done. They both disagreed with this, so we can ignore that push-pull statement. And you can do this across each of the interviewee and across the various different jobs. And that allows you to say, these 5 pushes, they had to happen to cause somebody to buy in this case, as did these 6 pulls. These were the important attributes that created this job. And if you look at these, so good group visuals, core part of my work, I need to do this, I'm worried about my ability to do this, I used to have someone else to do this for me. If we compare that to the next group, you can see they're driven by very different things. None of the same pushes appear here. Instead, they're pushed because they want to increase social media reach, when they see something that causes them to stop and think, and when they lack the artistic talent to do anything in the first place. So, they're different to group 1, group 2, group 3, and group 4. And so then we map all of this out, and I'll do more on this as a later stage. We'll show you the process I went through with Yanis to do that. But this is how you go from 15 disparate interviewees to pulling people into groups where we shared common motivations that caused us to go out and shop. And then I can map out, what is this? What's it more about? What's it less about? I can change my marketing. I can shut up a little bit about things people don't care about, focus on the stuff they do. I can look at the triggers that make them buy something, and when they finally get fed up, they stop bitching about something and they start switching. And I can map out the functional, emotional, social ways of feeling about this. Again, we'll do a deep dive on this in the future. The trade-offs that they make and the real competitors to this that people had, so that we're able to go in and we're able to surgically target this and map out the demand that these individuals had for products and services in the market. Hopefully that helps. Cheers.